Welcome back with a smiling face. Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. Echoes of Shattered Destiny. Episode 20. Chapter 153 to 160. Maddox made himself scarce for the rest of the night per Brianna's orders. Zeke stopped by half an hour after our conversation about the past and stole him from the front step after promising no alcohol or half-naked women. He made sure to clarify that meant for Maddox and not himself before peeling off into the night. Wait till he finds out instead of a kegger, we're teaming up with tonight's patrol. Maddox's voice was amused as it rumbled in my head, each syllable an aftershock that made goosebumps lift along my arms. You're going to ruin his entire night. I bit back my laughter as the doorbell rang and both Cassidy and Brianna's cheerful faces played on the security camera. I have to go now, the girls are here. Maybe give a little and let the poor alpha have a beer, he's been working hard since Carson's DH. I couldn't make out Maddox's reply because I'd already opened the front door and my head now rang with the excited chatter of Cassidy and Brianna. The cheerful blonde of the two toted in what looked like a kit full of nail supplies and makeup, while Brianna held up 2 bottles of the dark-colored whiskey Giovanni and Maddox often drank. The maple antique finish were still growing on me, but for Brianna it was an instant favorite. So, I came over prepared. Bite me. Cassidy said with her nose in the air but paused when she remembered who stood beside her. Brianna already had a cheeky grin on her face, so only a second passed before Cassidy began laughing and said, I would say that while standing in a room with a vampire and a vampire's mate. No worries, we only take our blood from bags. I teased and waited for the flash of disgust or hesitance to cross her face. Only laughter shimmered in her baby blues, which grew as she charged up the stairs after Brianna. I followed quickly behind, my heart light and smile wide even though I had questions for both of them tonight. I could ask about Cassidy's date with Lars while Brianna was in the room, but when I retold the story of how I made yet another unbreakable deal with the shadows to save my best friend's life, I preferred the two of us alone. Like everyone else, Cassidy knew little to nothing about the shadows, and I wanted to keep it that way. An hour later, with our nails freshly painted and 1 bottle of liquor down, we stumbled into the kitchen to order what was probably an obscene amount of pizza or what would have been if we were 3 human girls and not 3 tipsy she-wolves. The entire wait for the food I ran over various scenarios to get Brianna alone. Mind-linking was always an option, but I knew her face would give away the truth. All I needed was 5 minutes to explain the truth before I could make my escape and seek solace in the second bottle of liquor she brought. My slow trickle of ideas turned into full-scale panic when the doorbell rang. A jolt of frustration darted down my spine, so fast that I couldn't be sure if it were magic or just an effect of my liquor-fueled emotions. Oh my goddess! Cassidy hissed half a minute later. She darted into the kitchen, her hands empty of the pizzas she was supposed to be grabbing. The delivery driver stole the pizzas. Brianna gasped, staring at Cassidy's empty arms like someone had kidnapped her mate. What? No, no one stole the pizzas. Kendrick Bennett is outside. Cassidy snorted, then lowered her voice to a whisper. I realized she was blushing when she started fanning her face. He's the captain of the lacrosse team, he and I dated 6 months during my freshman year at the university. He's still unmated, and sometimes I can't help but think about him. Our relationship, it was so intense, you should go talk to him. I blurted, clasping a hand over my mouth even though it was far too late. It sounds like you aren't completely over him. Thankfully, Cassidy was tipsy enough to mistake my blunder as one of those bad ideas that pop up only when alcohol's been consumed. You think so? She whispered and leaned in. Sometimes I don't think I am, but I have a date with Lars tomorrow night. No one's saying leap into lacrosse guy's arms. What Brianna's trying to say is you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. I narrowed my eyes at her lopsided grin. You're totally right, I should go talk to him. Cassidy tittered, her eyes peering through the kitchen and towards the front door. Her glossy lips tilted up into a smirk as she tugged her sleeve shorts up her hips and readjusted her tank top to reveal a hint of cleavage. She called out over her shoulder, I'll mind link you code red if he tries to get handsy. As if you can't take him yourself. I saw you in training today. Brianna hooped, oh, and don't let the pizzas get cold. You're so right, but wouldn't it be a great way for some girl bonding if we did it together? She winked and slipped out the front door. Did you notice how she said nothing about the pizzas? Brianna said with narrowed eyes seconds after the door clicked shut. Let's not worry about the pizzas for a few minutes. I cleared my throat and mentally prepared the colossal apology I was about to give. When Brianna's eyes glazed over, I decided we needed a little fresh air. Come on, we're going outside. But pizza, she whined as she slid off the bar stool and followed. I closed the sliding glass door behind us and heard a quiet beep from the security camera mounted on the side of the house. We headed beneath the canopy on the patio and sank into a set of lounge chairs that overlooked the forest 30 feet away. An in-ground pool sat off to the side, not yet cleaned and prepared for the summer. We still had a couple of weeks left even though the days were passing with gaining speed. I get why you brought us out here now, Brianna said after taking deep breaths of the crisp nighttime air. I can't believe I almost got drunk and forgot. How can I forget about something like that? The breeze carried the scent of moist soil and fragrant plants, mixing with everything else to create an earthy perfume that called to the beast inside each of us. I get how you can forget, it was your life that was almost taken. Don't blame yourself for wanting to take your mind off it. The feeling was more familiar than I wanted to admit. When it's your life that DH calls for, and you narrowly avoid its grasp, you'd do anything to forget about it. I just wanted to tell you in private. Brianna could hear the way my voice wavered and could see that the pain in my eyes was left over from that night and would probably never leave my side. Tell me, Lola. I swear I'm not mad at you. I can't be, and neither can Joe. I'm here, I'm alive, and that's all that matters. Anything else we can deal with, I just need to know exactly what happened. She pleaded, and the desperation in her voice shattered my own selfish need to shove away the pain. Starting from the moment the bonds around my wrists and ankles snapped, I launched into the blood-soaked memory of last night. Every word I screamed and every emotion I felt hovered in the space between us, growing heavier the more my voice cracked and the more my throat constricted. You only told them to save me, that was it. She trailed off, a hand over her mouth as she stared at the dark forest with her eyes wide in confusion. It wasn't the response I'd been expecting, not in the slightest. I wasn't exactly thinking about specifics. I just wanted you alive and not wounded. I didn't care how it happened, I admitted and felt horrible in doing so. Brianna's voice was fragile and still so confused, and they didn't ask you for anything. No, they didn't. Brianna, why are talking like that? What aren't you telling me? Her eyes flitted to the forest just as the shadows deep within began to thrash and squirm. I could hear the echo of their silky voice when they noticed her and I. The reluctance written across her face as she turned her attention back to me made me wonder if she could hear their whispers too. When I told you the car Maddox loaned me broke down, it was the truth, but I didn't tell you how I got to training. The breath she let out was shaky and bordered on a sob, but it wasn't grief that welled in her eyes, it was joy. I shifted, Lola. The shadows gave me my wolf back. Chapter 154. I know, it's insane. Brianna's laugh was breathless and just a bit choked up as she wiped the tears from her eyes. Staring off into the forest, her voice unnaturally soft, she said, I never thought I'd be able to feel that kind of freedom again. It's like I can breathe again. Brianna, I don't know why they did that, but there's no way they won't want something in return. I wasn't sure what made my chest ache more, warning my best friend her dream come true might actually be a nightmare, or seeing the denial bleed across her face when I continued carefully, I'm just worried they'll take back what they gave you in the first place. I didn't want to say it, but she wasn't giving me a choice. There was stubborn refusal in her warm hazelnut eyes, but I knew no matter how miserable she was without her wolf, she'd be worse off without Giovanni. Giovanni's life. I murmured and watched as the iron bars of resolution slammed down over her eyes. No, that's not it. Brianna stood from the patio chair but made no move to head inside. Frustration was written across every corner of her face and was obvious in the semi-aggressive way she pulled her hair back. So I'm not a witch, but that doesn't mean my gut feelings can't be right too. Well, right now mine is telling me they wouldn't take my wolf and save Joe's life, only to return her and finish the job. I wanted to reassure her, but the only thing I felt was worried, both for her and Giovanni. Why can't I just have both? Her voice cracked, and she clenched her hands into fists while letting out a shaky breath. Devastation still shimmered in her eyes, but she held it down so well. Let's just drop it for tonight, okay? I know we can't ignore it forever. But if I could just have these few days with Joe. We can figure out what to do when I come back. Just from watching her pull the splintered shards of emotion from her skin and patch herself together, I realized I might have not given my best friend enough credit. Not once had she faltered at my side, even though she was going through so much herself. Instead she kept her problems to herself, even though a subtle feeling told me she'd been drowning in them. Feeling like a monumentally crappy friend, I stood and wrapped my arms around her waist, which I was sure looked comical since I was nearly a foot shorter than her. Sure enough, she began to chuckle, but I could hear the sniffling it covered. Watching the happiness that had just been rekindled fade in her eyes had a sobering effect. We're going to make sure you can have both, Brianna. I'll use every bit of magic I have to make sure of it. I promised, cracking a grin at her brave nod and the way she hastily wiped at her eyes. Minutes later, Cassidy eagerly interrupted with news about her lacrosse player ex-boyfriend, Kendrick. With gossip and a rapidly cooling pizza waiting, Brianna and I raced back inside. While we stuffed our faces with pizza from the small parlor down the street, Cassidy told us all about her whirlwind romance with Kendrick, which seemed more fueled by lust than anything else. Brianna wrinkled her nose at my slice of Hawaiian every other minute, but otherwise was absorbed in every seedy detail of Cassidy's story. My mom was absolutely against Kendrick from the start, despite what she says. It took her almost a year just to get over the fact that I wasn't Maddox or Brandon's mate. Cassidy rolled her eyes and let out a small huff as she tore the crust off her slice of pizza. From what I could tell of her expression, she looked more exasperated than jealous or longing. I didn't have nearly enough to drink to feel comfortable asking my questions outright, but Brianna had. Did you want to be one of their mates? Her voice grew quieter even though there was no one in the house to hear us. Any wolves patrolling the grounds would be well out of range, but that didn't stop her from asking it as though it were a secret. She hiccuped once and added, "Don't worry, Lola is freakishly good at not getting jealous. She won't go all tri-Brit on you for talking about her mate." When I snorted in her direction, her smile widened. Maya's tail swished in my head, letting me know how wrong our endearing friend was about us not getting jealous. I've definitely thought about how incredible it would be to be Luna, but at this point being mated to one of them would feel like being mated to a brother. Cassidy wrinkled her nose, creasing some of the freckles splattered along its slim surface. I think our parents expected it because of how persistent I was back then. The minute I saw Brandon and Maddox wrestling in the dirt, rougher than all the other kids, I knew I wanted to be best friends. The ease at which she spoke dissolved the tension in the room. If there was any hesitance on her end, I couldn't sense it. My relationship with Maddox and the titles I'd been given didn't affect the things she said, or the way she treated me. It was refreshing and eased the rest of the trepidation I had towards Cassidy. Maddox said himself, he's never even kissed her. Which means there's no reason to be jealous. I reminded my wolf, who at times could be much more hot-headed and stubborn than myself. A contemplative look forced her lower lip out in a pout, which lasted but a few seconds. I'm sure my mom won't hate Kendrick this time around. I might just cancel my date with Lars. Kendrick has a game out of town that day anyway, and I'm nothing if not persistent, which means I have to go too, especially if there's a good after-party. Clara's pretty persistent with Mason, Brianna pointed out, folding a slice in half before taking a large bite. I tried to wait patiently as she chewed, but I was already hooked. But I don't think it's friendship she's after. What do you think she's after? I asked before Cassidy got the chance, and noticed I was the only one of us to appear worried. Understanding in the form of a cringe slapped me across the face when Brianna leaned in and said, "His wow? Okay. Are you sure? How do you know?" Even though heat blossomed across my face, I pursed my lips and waited for an answer. Mason stepped out of training to take a call from her right when I walked in the building. She smirked tipsily, gently waving her uneaten slice of pizza around as she talked. Naturally, I harassed him until he told me everything. She's been asking Maddox for him for days now, but Mason keeps refusing. Well, one of Mason's patrol buddies was given guard duty and she used her taser magic and knocked him right out. Took his phone right out of his pocket and called Mason with it. No way, she sounds like a total badass. Taser magic? Goddess, sign me up. Cassidy exploded in warm laughter, the sound light and airy. That's not even the best part. Brianna shook her head, making her messy bun grow loose. She tied some of the bed sheets together at the hotel and wrapped them around his waist. Mason got to the hotel and found his friend hanging off the third-floor balcony. Which I know sounds dangerous, but his friend had already woken up at that point. The only reason he hadn't gotten himself down was because Clara threatened to zap him again, and apparently a second zap so soon after the first does something to the bowels and you just it sounds like she just likes pissing him off. I replied, lifting my eyebrow in her direction. Also, how does Mason feel about it? Yeah, she likes pissing him off the same way you like pissing Maddox off. The cheeky grin that stretched across her face grew wider, because she knew she'd won this round. As for Mason, he was blushing the entire time he ranted about her. Really, you think he likes her back? I couldn't help the surprise that popped into my voice. Werewolves who found love after surviving the death of their mates were rare. Mason had a better chance than most since he hadn't completed his bond, but that didn't lessen the pain of knowing your soulmate had left this world and moved on to the next. I think he's attracted to her, which he'd be an idiot not to be, but I think he doesn't really know what to do with the attention. Luckily, like I said, she's persistent. She'll find some way to get them alone together and push his buttons, just like you and Maddox. Hey, I was never the one to get him alone, remember? He was the one stalking me. I said shrewdly, letting out a sound of exasperation when she and Cassidy collapsed in laughter, sputtering snippets of conversation in between their snorts and wheezes. As both she-wolves succumbed to laughter and pawed at the tears budding in their eyes, my thoughts darted to Mason and the curvy exotic dancer who apparently had a thing for him. There weren't any flashes of fear or other gruesome emotions warning me about the young witch, only a healthy dose of suspicion which was far less than Maddox's regular everyday amount. I returned to the conversation just as the two had pulled themselves together. Cassidy was pouring herself another shot, while Brianna grabbed a few containers of ice cream from the freezer. "We're just teasing." Cassidy giggled and tossed back the strong-scented liquor. Her perfect pout remained in place even though I knew her throat must be burning. I think every she-wolf dreams of meeting her mate that way. It's just so strange seeing Maddox wrapped around someone's finger with how untouchable he can be. "Those are the best ones though." Brianna sighed, plopping down with a pint of mint chocolate chip, the worst ice cream flavor to grace this planet. "The men that act all tough and brooding, but secretly they want you more than you could ever imagine." Mason's getting the brooding part down, especially since meeting Clara. I think things between them would be explosive. He just has to stop being so stubborn. She giggled at her choice of words, undoubtedly comparing it to Clara's magical abilities. That night, after finishing 2 containers of ice cream and suffering through a long-winded romantic comedy we ended up hating halfway through, I stared at the ceiling in my bedroom and thought of Mason. It didn't matter how much time had passed, only that I was responsible for the death of his mate. There was no telling what could have changed with time if she would have left her vampire spouse to follow the bond that tugged at her soul. I'd taken that choice from her, and that future from Mason. The gentle and repetitive sound of Brianna's snoring had yet to lull me to sleep, so I wasted the time conjuring ways to get Mason and Clara alone together. Most of them were juvenile, like having Maddox assign Mason as her personal trainer. It wasn't too far-fetched since Clara knew absolutely nothing about defending herself without magic, but he'd see through me in a second if I were the one to give the order. Some way somehow, they would find themselves alone together, I was sure of it. Even more so, if Brianna were right and the spark between them mirrored Maddox and I's, it would only be a matter of time before they both caught flame. I wanted this desperately for Mason, for him to have some fraction of his happiness restored, some shred of peace reclaimed since his reason for existing had been so cruelly ripped away. Exhaustion was weighing down my eyes and pulling me into its deep abyss when my heart skipped a beat and a jolt spread throughout my chest. Though the feeling was abrupt, there was no stopping myself from tumbling over the edge. Right before plummeting, I wondered if it were my thoughts about Mason or something else entirely that caused my elusive magic to crackle down my nerve endings, and even more so I wondered what it meant. "Oh, these are good." Cassidy's moan sounded from the kitchen, followed by Brianna's laughter. I squinted against the early morning sun that peered through the CS and padded down the hall, catching snippets of their conversation the closer I neared. "Aren't they? You don't know him, but the recipe belongs to a grumpy vamp named Tristan. It took me days to figure out how to make them since he'd always grumble when I asked." The sizzle of something cooking in a pan followed Brianna's soprano and filled the air with something both sweet and savory. "Tristan knows how to cook?" I asked skeptically, leaning against the door jamb as both she-wolves spotted me lurking. Cassidy was perched on one of the island stools eating a bowl of oatmeal and nibbling on a rolled-up pancake, her strawberry blonde hair a halo around her shoulders. "Oh, he does. Joe was complaining about it a few days ago while cooking dinner. He said something about Tristan making his family recipes better than his nana." Brianna scrunched her nose and turned back to the omelette sizzling away on the pan. She said over her shoulder, "I can't believe how nervous I am to meet his family. Usually I don't care so much what other people think of me, but I can't seem not to care." I glanced down at the eggs simmering away and held back a frown. I'd have to sneak a bag of blood and some sugary cereal when the two of them left. Not that there was anything wrong with the omelette, but my appetite had been changing since becoming vampire queen. The sudden chime of the doorbell had me spinning around, but the figure standing beyond the frosted glass was distorted. Probably the newspaper boy. Cassidy shrugged and scooped another spoonful of oatmeal into her mouth. They'd be insane not to like you. You're the total package. I smirked at Brianna before crossing the foyer to the front door. Of course, you're right. How could I forget? Her laughter trickled into the foyer, along with her reply to Cassidy. You still get newspapers delivered around here. Maddox's dad tried to get rid of it a while ago. We have a website, even an app that broadcasts pack news across the country, but some of the older members were totally against it. They liked the way things were, so he kept it. The warmth that Cassidy had for Maddox's family was laced within her every word. My stomach dropped when I opened the door and heard Cassidy ask, "Your old alpha wouldn't have done the same, I'm assuming." Oh, this wasn't good. Tyler would have done what he wanted, and lock anyone who disagreed in the nearest cell. Brianna replied, and I could hear the grimace in her voice. Cassidy made a sound of disgust. Sounds like a grade A wolf right there. Her laugh was as dry and brittle as my own when I snatched the newspaper off the porch and glared down at the bold printed headliner. Well, you can read all about it on the front page. A snarl tore past my lips, making Brianna jump in a way I would have thought were odd if I hadn't been seeing red. Ignoring Cassidy's widened eyes, I slapped the newspaper down on the counter between them. It took several seconds for both to read and process not only the headline, but the two photos printed in bright coloring so vivid I felt like I were still there. You need to get a hold of Maddox, now. Cassidy paled, dropping her spoon into her oatmeal. It was quickly swallowed whole by the brown sugar and cinnamon-flecked sludge. Even Maddox can't fix this, what's done is done. Brianna frowned and leaned against the counter. It's not about him fixing it, it's about Lola getting to him before he finds the wolves responsible and kills them. I could taste the urgency in her voice and forced myself not to panic. My resolve only faltered a little when her sea-green eyes met mine, bright as they were honest. You know he'll use their deaths to make a statement, and from what I do know, the last thing you want is a public EN. I narrowed my eyes at the perfectly timed photograph of myself and Clint Armstrong facing off against one another, right at the scene of his son's MR. Brianna and Mason stood off to the side, both glowering with fists clenched. My chin was angled upwards as I met his defiant stare, and even though I was several feet shorter than him, there was something about the way I stood that felt more threatening, or maybe it was just my confidence and overinflated ego. Either way, someone had taken a photo that morning and I wanted to know who. As for the second, I had an inkling on the person responsible. Seeing Tyler's arm draped over my shoulder made my stomach clench, his bleached teeth and freshly plucked eyebrows now grating where I'd once found them charming and irrevocably handsome. It was his slender face and weasel-like nose that had me clenching my teeth, and not the way his eyes strayed mid-photograph to check out the scantily dressed bartender nearby. Chelsea's arm was linked with my own, the smile on her face more like a sneer now that I was no longer blinded by shallow popularity. There was no need for me to read the contents of the article, the headings pieced the stories together flawlessly. Tribrid, seductress linked to the DH of a young alpha, tied to the slayings of numerous wolves. My eyes strayed from the 5 columns of tiny print that took up the entirety of the front page. No way in H I was I reading those. I was both hungry and murderous, and worried Maya would hunt the culprit down themselves. Oh, goddess! Cassidy murmured, her eyebrows and forehead creased with disbelief. I heard as my heart skipped a beat, and then another when she flipped her phone around and showed me the PAX app. In the same bold lettering, was the article that depicted me as some sort of temptress. A headache throbbed at my temples. You're right, I'll try to mind-link him. Here, you think you're going out, or downtown looking for someone who did it? Brianna's slender lips tilted up at the corners as she handed me a blood bag. Don't even worry about it, I do hope it tastes better than it smells, though. Cassidy waved her hand dismissively even though she watched me with interest brimming in her eyes. I realized she was waiting for an answer, but my train of thought was stopped short when Brianna set a box of cereal in front of me. It was sugary and fruity, everything I looked for in a breakfast. She caught sight of my frown when I looked over at the omelette she made me forgotten on its plate. You know what's worse than cold eggs? Microwaved eggs. Brianna's lips were pursed as she shuddered. She shrugged a single shoulder. Besides, we both know you don't care what's for breakfast as long as you get your blood bag. Joe's the same way. Ignoring the feel of Cassidy's eyes on me, I emptied the blood into a cup and sent my thoughts veering down the mate bond, where I was met with a wall of nothingness. He must still be asleep. I told the two of them, my mind too clouded to notice the sugary cereal as it hit my tongue. Unease accompanied the food as it settled in my stomach. Where I slept, Maddox would wake to the smallest of sounds. Halfway through my second bowl, the shrill chime of a cell phone blasted from somewhere in the kitchen. I made a mad grab for it once I realized it was mine and frowned at the name on the screen. Zeke, tell me this bad feeling I'm having nothing to do with you and Maddox. I skipped the pleasantries and got down to business, but each second it took him to answer solidified the truth. The bad feeling you're having has nothing to do with me, and everything to do with Maddox. He blurted, stumbling over his words. It took me a few seconds to realize it was worry that filled his voice. I'm only telling you this because I love you like a little sister and because I'm more afraid of you than I am of him, but you need to come get him before he kills Clint Armstrong. Zeke, where are you? His office. Zeke's voice was gritty with emotion, but my thoughts were racing too fast to dissect them all. Armstrong decided to hand-deliver him today's paper. You're the only one that can get through to him. I tried and he threatened me. So, when you get him calmed down again, let him know I'll be expecting my apology in writing. I'll text you the address, but you need to get here fast before he. The call ended abruptly, but Cassidy was already on her feet with the car keys in hand. Don't bother waiting for the address, I know where his office is. It's the same building his dad's is in. Her smile was reassuring even though the pale complexion of her face told me she heard every word and knew how precious our seconds were. Joe and I were going to leave in a couple hours, but I can't just leave you to deal with this by yourself. Brianna frowned, her eyes darting between the two of us. Go to Giovanni and when I mind-link you tonight, I'll be expecting a detailed summary. Got it? Take advantage of the chaos and slip out of the pack unnoticed. I'm sure there will be wolves watching us after this. I'm sure my stern expression was flimsy at best, but it was enough to reassure her that we'd survive on our own. Only if you give me one. I'd like to hear what Maddox does to that foul-mouthed judge. Her face contorted into a grimace, and for a split second her eyes deepened past their natural mocha brown into something darker. It was that, paired with the coldness in her voice which sent a chill racing down my spine. Deal. I nodded slowly, scanning her eyes for any trace of that strange darkness. When I came up empty-handed, and found myself staring into the unchanged eyes of my best friend. Left with only the memory and fading chill of darkness, I couldn't help but wonder if it had ever existed at all. Chapter 155. Hopefully, Brianna makes it out before this all blows up. Cassidy huffed, tightening her grip on the steering wheel as we raced down the winding back roads, closer to the center of town. She seemed at ease behind the wheel, taking the sharp turns with a look of focus on her face. I jumped and clutched the seatbelt against my chest when the car lurched forwards, the exhaust snarling from the rush of power. Cassidy cursed, which was decidedly more surprising than the sudden acceleration, and leaned down to grab something off the floor. "Can't drive with these things on." Her snarl was forced through gritted teeth. We neared the trunk of a thick oak tree, and just when I thought we were going to plow into it, she sat up with a fuzzy pink slipper clutched in hand. With the flick of a wrist we coasted around yet another sharp curve, back to driving smoothly even though the speedometer didn't dip below 65. "You didn't notice anything strange when she mentioned Maddox and Judge Armstrong, did you?" I asked, forcing myself straighter in the seat. Cassidy drove some sort of vintage sports car, and the expensive-looking seats were all too easy to sink into. Maya had gone into full alert mode, scanning our surroundings even though there were nothing to see but trees. I had to force myself not to follow the bond between Maddox and me. We could talk later about why he decided to block me out and exact punishment by himself. Strange how. She turned her head and flashed a worried glance in my direction. "I didn't notice anything, did you?" I began, but quickly realized the panic I'd spread if I were to say anything. "I think I'm just stressed, and probably need a good nap." "No kidding, you were tossing and turning all night." A puff of air escaped her lips in what would have sounded like quiet laughter if her face wasn't scrunched with stress. The harsh blues in her eyes softened when she said, "I can only imagine. I'm drowning midterms and piles of homework, but you're fighting against what could become a full-blown war." I paused, feeling my heart skip a beat as I was thrown through space and time, reeling back to the day the earth ran red with blood. Only a split second it took to dredge up the screams, snarls, and sounds of breath from my memory. Stars danced behind my eyes as I got whiplash from returning to the present so soon. "A war? Who said anything about a war?" Cassidy shrugged one of her shoulders, but worry remained painted across her face as she said, "First with the vampires, and now the witches, everyone in town's saying it. That's what this is, isn't it?" A cold sweat broke across the back of my neck, and this time I let myself sink into the expensive leather seats. Not even the sudden flush of Maddox's rage reverberating down our bond could distract me from the sinking feeling in my gut that told me everyone was right. "No amount of damage control can fix this," Cassidy said under her breath, sending the car screeching to a stop in the middle of the busy street. A couple blocks away from the university was Town Hall. Only a sprawling garden and a few skillfully placed fountains blocked the pedestrians on the sidewalk from the main entrance. It mirrored a famous human building located in the capital of the country and stood tall with its 4 large pillars and abundance of square windows. Rather than a white turned eggshell sandstone on the exterior, there was slate gray paneling. Traffic had already slowed due to the crowd outside and the number of people swerving to the shoulder to catch a better glimpse at what was going on. My heart hammered at the thought of Maddox causing this spectacle, and I leapt out of the car ready to plow through 100 people. When the crowd parted and my brother's face appeared on the other side, I stopped in my tracks. "What took you so long?" he huffed, keeping his voice low until I was at his side. There were dozens of eyes piercing my skin, and not all were friendly. Sean met their glares with one of his own, while I kept my eyes trained in the direction we walked. Without realizing it, I'd been holding my breath waiting for their stares to turn into something more. Not a single person uttered a word, but I could tell by the number of newspapers held in clenched fists that more than one wanted to. "Do you not see the insane amount of traffic?" I muttered and was preparing to say more when I caught sight of Dad up ahead. We passed under the arbors of blooming roses and sprawling vines, to the small wrap-around porch that surrounded the place. A sign on one of the pillars showed that following it to the back of the building would lead to the parking lot, and it was in that direction that I heard the snarling. Dad was leaning against the railing, his expression pained as he spoke to Flora. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. The second was the way he placed all of his weight on his good leg. On the worst days, his knee would swell, and he'd be completely unable to stand. That was the joy of injuring yourself fighting in a war for a alpha. There was no compensation or awards, no ceremony honoring the sacrifices of the wounded. Just a single letter saying thanks for contributing was all Dad received. 2 if you counted the one his job mailed out 2 weeks later letting him know he'd been replaced by someone more capable. The sight of him leaning against the railing for support reminded me of those days, where after Sean and I left for school his stubbornness would win out and he'd try to stand anyway. The day he made it halfway up the stairs was the day Mom forbade any other attempts. He stumbled on the next step and woke up 3 hours later in a pool of blood, his arm broken and the bone protruding from his skin. It was this I thought about when I turned to Sean and asked, "Why is Dad here and what happened to his leg?" I knew he'd been eavesdropping by the way he turned his ear in our direction and lowered his voice, obscuring the words he said to Flora. My question had him looking over here, only it wasn't me or Cassidy he focused on, but Sean. "Don't you dare," Dad's eyes seemed to say. Sean's narrowed, identical right down to the splotch of greenish-yellow above his pupil. Maddox went feral when the judge guy showed up with today's paper. Dad was talking to Rowena when he heard them. Tried to pull them apart and Maddox turned on him. Maya's ears fell flat, slicked against her skull as she let out a low whine that made my ears ring. I felt the instinct to defend Maddox rise in my throat, along with the cruel words I knew would make Sean regret speaking up. It took all my allotted restraint for the day to clench my teeth and keep my mouth shut, but the action had an unintended effect. Rage poured into me, tinting my vision red and coating my tongue in with a sharp metallic taste. "Lola, he didn't mean," Dad began to defend him, his face pale as though he actually thought I'd harm Maddox. Jumbled words and broken bits of thought rushed through my head, but the response that left my lips came in the form of a snarl. I didn't wait for Sean to escort me or for Cassidy to follow, even though I could hear her cautious footsteps trailing a few feet behind. Dad cursed under his breath but didn't dare try to follow. If I'd been less enraged and more focused on my surroundings, I would have been able to hear the reassuring words Flora said to my dad, her hand resting on the shoulder of his flannel. As I rounded the corner of the porch, I came face to face with what the clamoring crowd were desperate to catch a glimpse of. The people lingering in the parking lot, watching protectively by their cars, were employees. Zeke and Beta Drake couldn't do much about them considering Maddox and Clint Armstrong were currently in the way. "Why are they doing this outside?" I hissed at Zeke, who remained stoic on the porch, his eyes glued to the 2 wolves battling it out in the parking lot. A slender woman with glassy mocha eyes and a green-tinted face inched towards me, doing everything she could to keep her eyes away from the fight. "We just had the carpets and hardwood redone," she murmured, toying with her dainty French tip manicure. The tendons in her slender throat stood out as she swallowed and said, "He didn't want to get blood on them, so he dragged him outside." I tore my eyes off Maddox long enough to frown at the trembling woman and say, "You and any other employee that needs it, take a paid week off." It's the least Maddox can do to apologize for his disruption. Her lips lifted for half a second, but Maddox's abrupt snarl made them drop. "Thank you, Luna. I'll spread the word," she said quietly, brushing one of her loose curls behind an ear before making a beeline for the door. Calling it a battle was kind considering Clint Armstrong had nothing on Maddox. What skill he might have possessed dried up when he chose to sit behind a desk for the last 2 decades, and his skills as a judge were doing nothing to protect him against Maddox's merciless blows. Blood covered most of his face and was overwhelmingly bitter as I scented it in the air. I could see where some had dried along his cheeks and lips, from where the wounds Maddox left healed only to be reopened seconds later. Before I could storm over there and tear into him, Maddox grabbed Clint by the neck of his shirt and lifted him like he was a child. The middle-aged wolf was taller than Maddox by a few inches, so his feet dug along the ground as he pulled him into the grass and continued unloading punch after punch to his face. "You saw it too, right?" Zeke asked without looking away from the fight. I didn't bother answering. Of course, I saw it too. This was the Maddox that turned on my dad, on his closest friend, the same one wailing on Clint so hard the impression of his body would be visible within the dirt for the rest of the week. His eyes were pitch black, which happened only when he was severely pissed off, but it wasn't the color Zeke was referring to. There was a complete lack of awareness within them, like his head had been emptied of everything, every memory and thought replaced by endless rage. I didn't hesitate as I stormed up to the two of them, but before I could place a hand on Maddox's shoulder, he turned on me. It took everything within me not to flinch as he spun around and raised his hand. His elongated claws caught the sunlight but stopped before they reached my throat. Cassidy's gasp rang in my ears, and I could practically feel the tension oozing from her and everyone else in thick waves. "Really, you're going to AK me?" I snapped at him, which might have made me look insane to everyone else, but Maddox always responded differently to my anger. He tilted his head, staring at me with eyes plucked from the darkest abyss. His hair was disheveled, and his face flecked with blood. The button-down shirt he wore shimmered with it but was too dark in color to show how much. When I crossed my arms over my chest, his eyes broke from my face to follow the movement. I wasn't sure what made him lower his clawed hand, but whatever it was made his eyebrows crease and the anger in his eyes flicker. Clint Armstrong chose that moment to stir and began shuffling further away from us. I gritted my teeth to keep from snapping at the man, not that it would have mattered because Maddox's snarl was loud enough to drown out even the shrillest of voices. "Mr. Armstrong, I'm going to recommend you don't move," I told him, keeping my voice a low and even tone. Clint muttered something unintelligibly, but I did manage to snag the word feral, which made a second snarl tear from Maddox's throat. There was a flash of annoyance in my voice when I added, "or speak. You aren't my alpha." Even distorted by pain and the blood in his mouth, I could make out Clint's slurred words. "She seduced you just like that other." I could tell Maddox was going to turn around and lunge when every muscle in his body tensed. Acting on the idiotic desire to spare Clint Armstrong's life, I stormed my mate and didn't stop until I felt his wet shirt beneath my hands. "Snap out of it and listen to me." The demand both vibrated in the air between us and shot through my body like a bolt of lightning, rushing into Maddox from where my hands met his heated skin. Awareness seeped into his eyes and replaced the feral light that once danced in their depths, but it did nothing to erase the anger on his face or ease his desire for retribution. Chapter 156. On the bright side, Maddox was no longer snarling and frothing out the mouth. The only caveat was that my fickle magic hadn't taken away the rest of his anger, because without an explanation or apology, he turned around and grabbed Clint by the shirt a second time. The battered but slowly healing judge was thrown to his knees just a few feet in front of me. Even though his face was a mottled and swollen mass of flesh, he managed to hold onto the air of superiority that clung to him. Its strength surpassed that of the scent of blood, and was stronger than the expensive cologne he wore, that even now I could smell. "Apologize to your Luna." When Maddox spoke, his voice resembled the endless pit I had seen in his eyes, the very one I somehow chased away using magic. His hair wasn't even disheveled from the fight, his heart rate barely elevated. His spine was made of pure steel, as rigid and unbreakable as his stance. Clint Armstrong sucked in a deep, shaky breath and spat a wad of saliva and blood at my feet. Before Maya could snarl in outrage, Maddox moved. Without an ounce of hesitation he crushed his knee into Clint's nose. I remained stoic even though the sound of Clint's nose shattering made me want to cringe. Even when fresh blood splattered across the tops of my white shoes, I remembered my title and who I was to these people. I'd always be a warrior, a protector, but the honor of being Luna came first. I couldn't openly challenge Maddox, not in this way and certainly not after Clint disrespected me so badly, but I couldn't let him mr the man either. No matter how inexcusable Clint's actions were, he had just lost his only son. "I'm sorry," he said through gritted teeth stained red with blood, eyes glittering with hate. The crimson liquid ran down his nose, which was now bent at an odd angle and lightly swollen. "Mean it?" Maddox snarled, glowering down at him. He bent down to Clint's level and tilted his head when the older werewolf flinched. "And use her title." I could feel Maddox was nearing that dark place I had pulled him from and sent my thoughts careening into the middle-aged wolf's mind. His pain was the soul-deep kind that came with losing a child, even though Cassidy let it slip. He and Devon rarely spoke. Only when Devon needed something or had gotten himself into trouble did he call on his father, not that Clint minded since he was often busy with work. There was nothing on my face that would give me away as I snarled at the man knelt before me, seconds away from what was becoming. "Forsake, Clint. You can't get vengeance or whatever it is you're after if you're DD. You went to law school, which means you're most likely a good liar. Just apologize and mean it before he kills you." Clint took a staggering breath and let out a nasty cough. The whites of his eyes were tinted red from his blood. They were wide with fear, absent of the hate and rage that had previously poured from their depths. I am sorry, Luna, what I did was inexcusable." "My son," he stammered, his voice gritty with emotion. "I was so angry and upset, I should have never spread those lies about you." "Oh, he was good. If it weren't for the persistent feeling in my gut, I would have never known he were lying." Maddox stared at him for a long moment, and finally acting on that sense of self-preservation, Clint avoided making eye contact. "It's you he disrespected, and it's you who should decide his fate," he said, eyes swiveling to my face. They were a warm chocolate brown, which wasn't close enough to his honey shade to ease my worries over a spontaneous decision to kill Clint. I kept my stare pinned on Clint's slowly healing face, counting the seconds as his bruises faded from purple to yellow. Without another word to the man who caused irreparable damage by feeding the media a false story, or my stoic mate who could taste every fiber of my anger and matched it with his own, I turned on my heel and walked in the direction of the porch steps. A near silent but relieved sigh sounded from Clint's direction. "We need to talk." I forced my way into Maddox's head, fueled by rage and what could have easily been a pinch of magic. There was no keeping my voice calm as I shoved the words into the deepest recesses of his thoughts. "Now." I didn't break my stride as I climbed the stairs and nodded at a stone-faced Zeke. The thump of his feet hitting the stairs could be heard before he called out to the small crowd. "All right, everybody. You're all free to go, enjoy the next 3 days off." The last thing I saw before calmly pulling open the back door to town hall was Zeke slinging a partially unconscious judge over his shoulder. If I had waited for Maddox to follow instead of using his scent trail to locate his office, I would have never been able to keep myself from spewing all the things churning in my mind. "What are you doing?" Maddox's rough voice filled the space behind me, and I whirled to find him standing across the room. Glancing one last time out the window, I watched as the larger crowd out front began to disperse. The metal curtain rings scratched against the rod as I flung them shut and grunted, making sure no one can hear us. This office is soundproof. Of course it is. I scoffed under my breath, and slowly turned around to face my mate. He stood in front of the door, but as I met his eyes he crossed the room and headed for the executive desk covered in paperwork. The calm way he lowered himself into the chair sent a rush of anger straight to my head. "What was that?" I asked him slowly, using what little restraint I had to keep myself from storming over to his desk and throwing the single guest chair at his head. Did he expect me to sit on the other side and speak to him like I were nothing more than a disgruntled pack member? There wasn't a chance that was going to happen. I abandoned my spot by the window and walked over to his desk slowly, stalking him like a wolf would her prey. His eyes narrowed as he read the challenge in my movements, but he remained seated, even as I came to a stop on the other side. Rather than lower myself into the chair like a good Luna and mate would do, I placed my palms flat on the desk and towered over him. His son Maddox began, but my anger quickly won out and put an end to his empty explanation. His son didn't just D*E Maddox. He was brutally MD, and Clint thinks I'm the one who did it. How else do you expect him to respond? I snapped, and the feeling of splintered wood beneath my fingers let me know my nails had been elongating. Maddox didn't fumble for an answer and replied without pause, with respect. Above anything else, you are his Luna first. You can't expect him to follow me if he thinks I'm his son. If I were to DE and my dad did something like this because he blamed you, would you KL him too? I asked sharply. That's different. His expression darkened, morphing his irises from the color of fresh soil to pitch black waters. Is it? Is it? He repeated, eyebrows inching closer together. Do you understand the problems this could cause? The problems it's already caused. Without waiting for a response, he pulled a copy of today's newspaper out and set it on the desk. Only when silence enveloped us did I break eye contact and look down. The front page looked the same with its 4 columns and 2 blown-up photographs both starring yours truly. When I looked back up, my face was blank. Maddox narrowed his eyes into slits and asked, "Have you even read it?" It was the weird sense of awareness that often appeared within the pits of my stomach that alerted me to the change within Maddox. His eyes unfocused, making his pupils widen and shrink. Rather than seeing only my face, his vision expanded to take in what I was wearing, or rather, what I wasn't. Dashing upstairs to change when Maddox was in the process of shortening Clint Armstrong's life hadn't been a priority at the time, so I had no choice but to try and assert myself wearing nothing more than a lace camisole and pair of cotton shorts. On my feet were a pair of sandals I snatched from Cassidy's car, and I watched as his aggression gave way to another hunger of sorts. The shift wasn't on a physical level, but I couldn't help but feel as though Maddox wasn't entirely in control of the reins anymore. I pursed my lips and tried to bide time, but each passing second alluded to the truth. Deep within my head, I could feel the roar of my instincts as they instructed me to lie. Maya's ears twitched and she muttered, "Are you getting the overwhelming urge to run right now?" Choosing to ignore her and the ever-increasing sound of alarm bells in my head, I replied with a resounding, "Sure have." Maddox didn't so much as blink as he stared me down, eyes dark enough to SW his pupil hole. The silence he began to me in was thick with sense of foreboding, so strong that I was helpless to stop myself as I made a wild dash for the door. The sound of scattering papers filled the air only half a second after he leapt over the desk. A single fleeting moment was all I had before the heat and roughness of his body descended upon mine. Chapter 157. Get off of me! I snarled, lacing my voice with venom even though my body's reaction told a different story. Maddox didn't smirk, nor was he gentle when he pulled my head back by the long strands of my hair. The pain that crackled across my scalp was mixed with something almost pleasurable, and I fought as it stoked the glowing embers that warmed in my core. If you want me off, then remove me. Even back then you were able to do it, weren't you? His laugh was deep and the sound of it strengthened the sparks that caressed my skin, but rather than humor it held hunger. My face heated and refusing to take his bait, I bit back my snarl. Were you even trying to get away, Lola? He tilted his head as he asked and leaned in to run his nose along the underside of my jaw. As I heard his soft inhale, a shudder rolled down my body. Because from the scent I'm picking up, you're exactly where you want to be. An almost painful throb began between my legs, and Maddox's eyes darted down as though he could feel it himself. Maddox, we need to talk about this, I said through clenched teeth. Where are your clothes? He asked, and from the soft tone his voice had taken on, I knew nothing I said would deter him. You were about to kill someone, I didn't exactly care about my outfit at the time. Would you rather me have put on a sundress? Or maybe a pair of boots to protect me from the blood splatter? It might have not been the best idea to catch an attitude with an alpha halfway off the rails, but I'd always been impulsive. Looking back, I expected him to force me onto my knees or tear my clothes off, both of which I would have given into, but Maddox had something different in mind. I bit back a yelp when he pulled me away from the wall and into his chest. From the heat in his eyes, I could tell a reaction was what he wanted, and as much as it pained me to do the opposite, I was nothing if not horribly stubborn. Rather than fight against his hold, I gave into it and followed him as he both forced and guided me back to the massive executive desk. Maddox paid no mind as we trampled the papers that littered the floor and reclaimed his seat in the leather chair. His iron grip on my hips warned me to remain where I stood in between his legs, but were also loose enough that I could break through them if I actually wanted to, which he knew all too well that I did. Both Maya and my instincts told me to kick him, but I knew this would grate on his nerves more. Do you remember what happened last time I caught you half naked? Lightning fast my mind darted back to what felt like years ago but had really only been months. I still had the imprint of his hand, only it was in my memory rather than on skin. The second I opened my mouth to answer, he pulled me onto his lap and tore the shorts I wore off my body. One quick tear and my bottom was exposed, prickling with goosebumps from the sudden rush of chilly air. I snarled as I felt him harden beneath my stomach, enraged from his choice of punishment but also thrumming from his reaction to me. A satisfied noise came from his mouth when he ran a hand over my soft skin, though I wasn't sure he heard it himself. I felt the absence of his hand and closed my eyes in time to feel his grind against me, followed by a swift and heavy smack. Stars, bright and full, danced behind my eyes and a hiss curled from between my teeth. A second quickly followed, this one sharper than the first and its effect even stronger. By the fifth I had to clench my legs together to ignore the throb that pulsed between them, which Maddox realized and quickly put an end to. Anger flared alongside arousal, becoming stronger the longer I found myself drowning in pain and pleasure. I was being punished for something I didn't do, for something that didn't even matter. The only thing within reach was his th, which I promptly dug my nails into after making sure the tips were nice and sharp. What was better than the feel of his muscle beneath my hands was the way he jumped and let out a wolfish snarl from the sudden pain. The mouth-watering scent of his blood filled my nose, making my head swim in mouth water. Both rich and tart like chocolate-covered cherries, only there was an undertone of something dark and powerful that made my entire body sing with strength. Only one time had I tasted his blood, when he sliced his hand cooking, and that was well over a month ago. 4 hours he fucked me, so ravenous with need that I hadn't again dared taste his blood. It had been too intense, too soul-shattering. You couldn't be obedient even if you tried. He chuckled lightly, it's what makes you perfect, Lola. Your heart is pure, and your will is indestructible. Even now I couldn't tell if Maddox remembered the way he begged for me to take more, to sink my teeth into his neck and feel the explosion of salty sweat mixed with the dark allure of his blood, but I knew it was something I'd never forget. Not once was I asked to draw his blood, to coax it from his veins with my teeth, so I swallowed the urge when it popped up, but now I knew he'd been waiting for me to make the first move. I whimpered from anticipation alone and turned my head far enough to latch onto one of the healing wounds. Don't you dare, he began, but the moment my teeth broke skin his voice dropped, and his words were replaced with a pained groan. A feeling not unlike the sparks that raced across my skin began to fill my body. He started me like a madman. So perfect, and all mine, that's it, take what you need from me. Whatever you need. I couldn't recall the reason for my hesitation earlier, nor did I notice how strong the odd taste in Maddox's blood was when I sought out the shimmering mark on his neck and sunk my teeth deep into its surface. Chapter 158. Hours later I could still hear his roar in my ears, trickling down my spine in wave after wave of crippling pleasure. His face was painted in my head, eyes black with need and jaw carved from stone, even though the promises he whispered were soft and sweet. It played in the background of my mind and along the swollen, tender bits of my skin as Rowena's delicate voice threaded words together in small notes of conversation. I'm not sensing any magic attached to him, she said with an encroaching frown, her lips painted in a new shade of lipstick, one with a nude undertone that reminded me of a caramel latte. Her dainty hands moved swiftly, weaving around one another in a graceful dance that was made mysterious by the jade glow they emitted. A scowl coated Maddox's face in harsh lines and angles when she dropped them. Just a great deal of stress, and quite a bit of anger. As I thought he would, Maddox stood from the leather chair the moment a wilting note of sympathy laced itself within Rowena's voice. With the pressure you're both under, no one can blame either one you for acting swiftly. You're both so young, with such little time to enjoy it. The stubble across his jawline rippled from the tensing of his muscles as he grunted, there will be plenty of time to enjoy youth once the people murdering our pack members are brought to light. Yes, well, with that attitude you're bound to succeed, she replied, aiming a tight-lipped frown in his direction. It mirrored one a teacher might make when an unruly child spoke out of turn. Her eyes, the same jade green as the treetops outside, slid over the stony expression on my face and stalled. Will I still be seeing you at training today, Lola? She'll be there. Maddox answered first, his voice curt and attention placed solely on me, even though the witch he replied to was standing a few feet to his left. I didn't break my stare from his, and instead listened to the ominous beat our hearts made, counting each note until Rowena cleared her throat and said, I'll leave you both to talk, then. You've gone fully insane if you think I'm letting you out of my sight. I told him only after the thud of the heavy office door swinging shut faded from our ears. My words hung in the air between us and were much truer than either of us could have known. As his eyes narrowed and head tilted, I shifted on my feet and nearly bumped into the bar cart and coffee maker I stood beside, both of which I knew were unused because Maddox didn't drink coffee. I may be called insane in tomorrow's papers, but what this article is calling you is much worse. Both his baritone and the tiny ink of the newspaper clipping traveled the short distance to pelt me with the truth. He spun the page around and stopped it with a finger. I'll spare you the specifics, so you'll still be surprised once you read it yourself, but it paints a pretty little picture of your life this past year. Tyler's birthday, returning home, meeting me, the murders. The wolf that wrote this, the web of lies that they've spun, it's more than convincing. It's already begun to turn heads, and not just ones in our pack. Whose, then? I asked and instantly regretted it when his fists clenched, and irritation flashed within the pits of his eyes. His laugh was as dry as the air I sucked into my lungs, swirling with dust particles that made my throat constrict. The ones surrounding ours know, and the news is spreading by the hour. Within a month every pack in the world will know someone else's version of your story. They'll have more reason than ever to hate you and every witch or vampire they stumble across. His eyes softened at the sudden rush of my fear, but he didn't move from where he stood. I wasn't sure my stomach could plummet any further, but as always Maddox lived to prove me wrong. I could practically taste the wicked promise on his tongue when he said, "I wish I could tell you that we're it, but it's not. Our old friend Alpha Bran. He's already campaigning against you." "You're joking," Cassidy hissed, narrowing her eyes in a way that reminded me of Brianna. I had mind-linked my best friend during the 15-minute drive to the training center and told her everything that happened after our peaceful morning turned tumultuous. Part of me needed a second opinion on what happened with Maddox, while the other side wanted to shove his vicious glassy-eyed stare deep within the depths of my mind, buried so deep I'd never have to hear the empty tone of his voice again. A half an hour later I found myself sitting beside Cassidy, stretching on the padded mats that lined the classroom we met in every weekday for training. With over a dozen other students doing warm-ups around us, talking wasn't an option. I wish I were joking. I sighed out loud, leaning forwards to touch my toes. Cassidy followed my movements and together we stared at the floor, our ponytails grazing the sweaty, blood-stained mat. "I mean, you saw him. He was feral or something. How does that just happen to someone? Maybe it is an alpha thing." Cassidy's baby blues were reluctant as they flitted over to meet my own. When I turned my head in her direction and the burn in my muscles faded into static, she swallowed and quickly explained. "What I mean is there's still a lot we don't know about alphas. They're stronger, faster, they have bigger wolves. We know they have rage and possessiveness down to a science, but maybe this is what happens when an alpha gets overwhelmed. You don't seem convinced of that, and you're the one that's known him his entire life." I pointed out the obvious, returning to a standing position in time for Amelia to begin today's lesson. Even though this was the second time I'd seen her sweep into the room and claim the attention of every student, the awe that followed hadn't lessened. There was something incredibly feminine about her delicate eyebrows and slender nose. Even her wide-set mouth and plump lips were symmetrical and gave her a softness one wouldn't associate with a warrior. Those qualities paired with her rippling muscles and broad shoulders highlighted her unique form of beauty. "All right, class. I know we're all a bit amped from what happened to Devin Armstrong and may he rest in peace, but this is when we need to settle down and focus. You're here to learn how to defend yourself, to master your weaknesses and turn them into strengths. That, my students, is how you stay alive." 15 Amelia walked the length of the room, eyeing us like we were soldiers prepping to step onto the battlefield. Her soprano voice bounced off the brick walls, sharp like the commands of a general at war. I was immediately grateful she hadn't taken a side, unlike some of the students in the room who felt the need to tell me they supported Clint Armstrong and the mess he had made. As her speech came to its conclusion, she came to a stop at the center of the room. For a moment she stood there, hands clasped behind her back as she stared us all down. More than half the wolves began to shift on their feet, averting their eyes in favor of the floor, ceiling, or their athletic shoes. Even Cassidy's jaw began to clench, but I knew from the stubbornness written across her face that she'd never submit to Amelia. It was my position in this pack which made staring into her champagne-tinted eyes all too easy. "How many of you know the 10 core fundamentals to Krav Maga?" Amelia asked, holding my stare as though she were waiting for me to raise my hand. No one else in the room responded, except for Cassidy, who let out a disgruntled huff under her breath. As my hand inched into the air and the curious and condemning of the other students fell on my face, I felt a rush of Maya's stubborn strength fill my bones. "Eyes, Luna, if you'd be kind enough to tell us the first three," Amelia said, gesturing to the room to show that everyone was waiting for me to speak. I stepped forwards and met the eyes of the students staring me down, the word murderer written across the tense muscles in their faces. "The first is to aim for your opponent's weak points," I said loudly, plastering my attention on a she-wolf who at the beginning of class felt the need to snarl the word traitor as I walked into the room. My words were directed at her and her alone. Shifting weight to a particular side could mean a childhood injury that didn't heal correctly. Without waiting for the blood to rush to her face and embarrassment to claim her features, one pivoted my head in the direction of another student, this one a muscular guy who promised I'd receive my comeuppance soon enough. The second and third go hand in hand. Quick and powerful responses are what will save you in battle. You have to be ready for the situation to go from 0 to 100, but strength will only get you so far. Speed and technique are crucial. They'll win you any fight, no matter how big the meathead you're up against is. One by one I ran through them all, using each fundamental to pick apart the weaknesses of the students who decided to stand against me and Maddox. As I recited each one by memory, courtesy of Chris, who pummeled me into the dirt until they were etched into the back of my skull, Amelia's smile seemed to widen. "Wonderful," she exhaled, speaking only after I'd finished shaming half the class. She noticed their embarrassment and anger. She didn't let on. Her eyes darted from face to face. "Now that is a warrior. Someone who not only memorizes every single aspect of a fighting form, but also uses those moves in a way that turns them into art, into a dance where one lives and the other dies." Once she finished making the rounds, her attention returned to me. "Luna, would you mind sparring with me? I'd like to give the class a demonstration of a few of those fundamentals." "Of course," I replied instantly and without a hint of hesitation. "Good luck, she punches hard." Cassidy's voice trickled into my head, and I glanced back to see her eyebrows furrowed and lips pursed in the direction of our trainer. I made sure to take my time approaching, using those valuable seconds to scan Amelia from head to toe. Her widening grin told me she knew what I was doing and was thrilled to see me respond accordingly. As I watched her walk a few feet to her left, I noted no imperfections in her long stride nor in the way she bounced on the balls of her feet. This might actually be challenging. Maya murmured, impressed even though we'd yet to begin. "Can anyone here tell me what our Luna just did?" Amelia asked the class once I stood at her side. When no one raised their hands, she continued, "She sized me up and took in my movements, posture, and the way I distribute my weight. This is what a warrior does. They see the fight in their head before it even begins, and that way they'll always be prepared. The man who trained me always said preparing is half the victory." I said both to Amelia and the class, thinking back to simple days in Grandma's cottage, where training with Chris was the most strenuous thing I had to deal with. Amelia's eyes twinkled pleasantly when she asked, "And what is the other half, Luna?" "The other half is earned," I told her, this time turning away from the class to stare into the eyes of the she-wolf Cassidy claimed long ago tried to win Maddox over. There was no malice I could detect, whether it be with my eyes or what strange sense unlocking my magic had given me. Either way, right now she was an opponent. With that reminder swirling in my head, I squared my shoulders and sank into my fighting stance. Through blood and sweat, it is earned. Chapter 159. The moment her fist connected with my shoulder, I knew Cassidy hadn't been exaggerating. Amelia punched hard, like MMA level hard. Not only was she strong, but she was fast too. She came at me without warning, without shifting into a stance that let me know the battle had begun. She had hoped to catch me off guard, but Chris had skinned my hide too many times for me to make that mistake again. His method of keeping me on my toes came in the form of sneaking through my window in the dead of night. If I weren't on my feet the second the window cracked open, I'd quickly find myself groaning on the floor with the taste of blood in my mouth. His methods weren't humane by any means, but they worked. Boy, did they work! I used my small stature to weave in and out of her blows, a partner in a painful dance that would surely leave me black and blue. If I weren't a Luna or a vampire, I might have lost this fight. That being said, my positions gave me power and speed, both of which I used in abundance just to remain on my feet. You see how she's not letting me knock her off balance? Amelia shouted to the class, who watched with overflowing interest despite the thick silence that enveloped the room. If you fall in battle, you have seconds to act before your mistake becomes fatal. To prove her point, Amelia let me knock her to the ground. In a move that I would have done if the roles had been reversed, she kicked out with her long legs and managed to clip my ankle in the process. My legs buckled from the sharp pain that danced up my tendons and bone, but a quick roll to the side followed by a few sharp jabs kept me advancing forwards. What ended our match was a sharp whistle that exploded from the back of the room. I barely noticed it. The shrill sound couldn't reach me, not while this sea of adrenaline churned in my head, its frigid waters bursting with every technique, move, and tip I'd learned from Chris. When Amelia faltered mid-punch and I managed to land a crushing kick to the side of her ribcage, I knew the whistle hadn't been intended for me. The warrior, whose prowess I actually found myself admiring, fell to the ground. She recovered quickly, with speed I found impressive despite the fact that I was faster. Before she could make it to her feet, my foot was at her throat. I kept it there, hovering above her pulse point, feeling the faint thud hit the millimeter of air between us. I could have used this moment to assert myself, to land a final blow that would prove to these wolves that I wasn't one to be messed with, but it was Amelia's eyes that halted the idea in its tracks. They at me with pride, but also just a stirred-up hint of fear. It was that fear that made me lower my foot and extend a hand. "Here, he's got it," Amelia said through heavy breaths, smiling as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. The expression soured as she turned to glare daggers at the class. Even I had to repress the urge to flinch at the ferocity in her voice. "Who did that?" For far too long the class stood in silence, most of them cowering under her heavy stare. I noticed quickly that Cassidy wasn't one of them, and Amelia seemed to notice as well because her eyes darkened to a muddy brown when they registered her face and tense posture. Cassidy took a step forward and Amelia's mouth opened, but the high-pitched bleating of a cell phone rang out instead of her voice. "Apologies, I'm afraid I have to take this," Amelia murmured to the glass, though her eyes remained on my tanned, narrow-eyed friend. She slipped from the room without another word, her shrill ringtone fading as she walked down the hall. "Way to kick someone, Luna," Cassidy cheered when I ventured back to her side. A snicker escaped her lips as she toyed with the end of her ponytail. "Goddess, what a cathartic experience. I've been waiting to see her get her kicked for years now." "You really don't like her, huh?" I kept my laugh light but couldn't help the way my head tilted with curiosity. Knowing she'd chew me out if I said this aloud, I slid into her thoughts and asked the question circling my brain. "Were you the one that whistled at her?" Cassidy's eyes twinkled mischievously, and within their depths I swore I saw something that reminded me of Chelsea. "It was a bit harsh, I know, but you have no clue how much she has coming to her." Her thoughts had a sour undertone that alerted me to how much she disliked Amelia. With a quiet grunt she lowered herself to the floor and placed her back against the wall. She seems friendly and approachable, can't help but wonder what she did to make you hate her so much. I said truthfully, sitting down beside her as we waited for Amelia to return. Look, if I show you this, you can't tell anyone, got it? I mean, obviously people already know, but they don't speak about it because they're all weaklings who fear me, and rightfully so. Cassidy huffed, gnawing on her lower lip until the pale pink of her skin turned red. As she tucked the golden strands of her bangs behind her ear, a fuzzy image began to form in my head, one that was pulled from the depths of someone else's memory. Ugh, Cass, wait up! Brandon shouted, his voice a few octaves higher and his appearance almost 10 years younger. His feet seemed to land in every single puddle, sending droplets of muddy water scattering into the air. They seeped into the white t-shirt he wore, but only made the grin on his face widen. It was one of playful joy and not the callous scowl I was used to seeing him wearing. Not a chance in hell. Last time I was it for 2 weeks. You're not catching me anytime soon. I heard Cassidy say, her laugh exuberant as it rang in the air like a symphony of delicate bells. I saw flashes of golden curls through the tall grass feet away. It swayed in the breeze, jostled by the light rain that continued to fall. Only Maddox can catch me. He's never it. Maddox is in alpha training, Cass. You know he doesn't have time to play anymore. Brandon's little frown and furrowed brows squeezed at my heart hard enough for me to memorize the forlorn look that lasted on his face for only a few precious seconds. Well, I'm not coming out until he catches me. He promised he would this time. She shouted from deeper within the grass, her voice facing with each word tossed into the air. Brandon groaned loudly and threw his hands in the air. Fine. I'll get Maddox, but you have to promise you won't sneak out while I'm gone. That's cheating, and cheating means you're automatically it. What? Cassidy squealed in horror, you just made that rule up. Can't hear you anymore, walking away now, going to get Maddox. Brandon shouted, cupping his hands around his lips as he backed away. When his small form vanished behind a hill, I saw a pale face with bright blue eyes pop out of the grass. The cheeky grin belonged to Cassidy, though it was laced with the fading innocence of a child hitting their teenage years. As she tiptoed out of the grass and headed in the direction opposite to where Brandon went, I realized she couldn't have been older than 13. The scenery changed as she walked, her blue jeans darkening with each water droplet that landed on them. Even her paisley top, which looked adorable when paired with the dainty charm bracelet around her wrist, was changing colors from the rain. Before long we stood in a small neighborhood, similar to the one Maddox's parents lived in. Even in the rain, children crowded the sidewalks. Bikes and scooters, sticks of melting chalk clutched in the hands of kids too young to partake in many other activities. They were everywhere, laughing and playing like their tomorrow would never come. It breathed life into Cassidy's cheerful walk, which soon fizzled out when I heard Amelia's voice. You should have known better than to come back around here. Amelia said, appearing from the side of a pale yellow house whose front porch was in the beginning stages of construction. Even as a child her champagne eyes were bright and her voice a high soprano that reminded me of a robin's song. Those eyes of hers narrowed into little slits and her hands became fists that trembled at her sides. You don't own the neighborhood, dummy. Cassidy sneered, wiping away some of the ash blonde curls that clung to the sides of her wet face. This is Maddox's pack, and Maddox is my friend. I hadn't a clue what happened before this, what events formed the snowball that grew and grew until it was an avalanche cresting down the side of a great mountain, ready to crush them all. They were children, but the way they glared at one another reminded me of adults. Amelia stomped over to Cassidy and grabbed a handful of her hair without warning, breaking out into a run that forced a scream from Cassidy's mouth. She had no choice but to follow and bled onto the sidewalk after Amelia. The other children looked at the fight happening just feet away on the sidewalk where so many of them played. Some pointed, others laughed, and taunted Cassidy, who quickly found herself on the pavement. Amelia leaned down to whisper something in Cassidy's ear when the memory came to an end. Even though I was floating back to the present, I could still taste the rain on my tongue and could see the murder that mixed with the embarrassment on young Cassidy's face. I blinked a few times, pawing at my eyes when they began to water from the artificial light. Cassidy's face came into focus, slender and much more angular than it had been all those years ago, though her expression was exactly the same. Rage and embarrassment. Looks like Maddox wasn't kidding when he said she doesn't handle embarrassment well. Maya murmured, flattening her ears against her skull. What is it she whispered in your ear? I couldn't help but ask, feeling my curiosity expand in my chest like a bubble ready to pop. The door opened with a slight creak and Amelia stepped back inside. In that same moment, Cassidy gave her a feverish glare and sent her answer rushing down the mind link, so fast that the words rattled around in my head before rearranging themselves. She told me he wouldn't be my friend for long. Not once she got her hands on him, she promised she'd make sure he knew just how ugly and disgusting I actually was. The way she said it struck me as odd. There was no emotion in her voice, no burst of rage turning her irises a deep shade of blue. It wasn't the words Amelia said that stuck with her, that turned her anger into something more potent. It had been the embarrassment, the shame she felt when she was vulnerable and broken, teased by the cruel children who did nothing to help. We didn't speak of the past for the rest of the lesson, and instead put every ounce of our focus into sparring. Once class was finished and every ounce of pent-up rage flowed from Cassidy's body and into the mats, we emerged out the set of double doors leading into the parking lot. Hey, I've got to get going. I'm getting all dolled up tonight to go out with Kendrick. Her lips tilted up in a silky smile that contained a double meaning I didn't miss. After saying our goodbyes, I readied myself to merge into the sea of students flooding the parking lot. It was Amelia's voice, oddly unchanged from her childhood, which gave me pause. Luna. Mind if I get a word? She shouted above the chaos of the crowd, all of which were eager to get home and shower before continuing with the rest of their day. For a moment I contemplated ignoring her, feigning ignorance as I vanished within the throng of people. It was a tugging in my gut, a feeling of concreteness that made me turn around and wait for her to catch up. You were beyond impressive back there, really. If you weren't Luna, I'd offer you a position, effective tomorrow. Amelia put every ounce of emotion into her laugh, which was warm and effortless despite the cruelty I saw on her childlike face. She pulled a small pin from her hair and sent the tiny ringlets spiraling down her shoulders. I was serious about hiring that trainer of yours, though. You think he might be interested? He's a bit of a recluse. I cringed at the word I used, knowing Chris would kick me into next week if he heard me saying such a thing. He didn't like it when I brought up his general hatred of other people, even less so when I attached words like recluse, hermit, or loner. Seeing the disappointment form on her face and the light leave her eyes made me stumble for a solution. I can't promise anything, but I can try to get a hold of him, at least to relay the offer. Yes. Oh, I can't thank you enough. Tell him benefits are included along with pension and retirement. We can work out his salary if he agrees. She nodded eagerly, but her excitement was short-lived. A student with bleach blonde hair passed by, and the cheerfulness on Amelia's face dropped. Even though the girl's roots were a deep shade of brown, I knew it was Cassidy she reminded her of. During class, did you see who whistled? Amelia asked quietly, her eyes scanning the parking lot as the grim expression on her face darkened. It didn't appear from out of nowhere, but instead seemed to resurface from somewhere deep within. With lips pressed into a thin line and reluctance hardening the softness of her face, she asked, "Was it Cassidy who did it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. There was this twisting in my gut that felt right and wrong all at once, like a storm of knives and butterflies that refused to cease. It yanked me in Amelia's direction, only to send me spiraling in Cassidy's. Even with that torn shred of the past, I had no clue who to trust. Unfortunately, my hesitation was answer enough. Amelia nodded her head, and the bleak understanding in her eyes made an apology float past my lips. "Don't apologize, Luna. I know it wasn't your fault." She shook her head gently, her lips twitching at my surprise. "You probably don't remember me, but I was one of the warriors that came to help when your father attacked your old pack. I killed a lot of vampires that day, and each one haunts me the moment the sun goes down. Corey, my mate, he's a good guy. Keeps me safe from what demons he can, even though it'll never be enough to save me." On that battlefield, I realized something. The vampires, they're just like us. Hating, loving, fighting each day to survive and make something of themselves. Seeing them as monsters, it makes us no better than the humans that call us beasts. You were the first to see that. It's why I support you, Luna, and why I always will." Her eyes darkened into that muddy brown as a shadow of a memory ghosted across her face. "It's also why I'm going to take the risk and warn you, knowing it could be my job or life on the line if you don't like what I'm about to say. You don't have to worry about your job, or your life." I swallowed and tightened my grip on the water bottle in my hands, even though it would do nothing to soothe my dry throat. "I appreciate the reassurance, Luna, and I do hope you listen when I say this," Amelia murmured, her voice quiet and eyes guarded as they scanned the space above my head, far into the parking lot where students still milled about. "I've done things in my past, stuff I'm not proud of, but I'm no longer that kind of she-wolf. People change every day, but Cassidy, she isn't one of them. I'm not telling you to not be her friend, but just keep what I'm telling you in mind. She can be charming and nice, until she isn't anymore." Chapter 160. She can be charming and nice, until she isn't. No matter how many times I told myself not to take Amelia's warning to heart, her words played on repeat in my head. The drive to Rowena and Cordelia's wasn't nearly long enough to sort through everything I'd learned. Not only that, but I was no closer to identifying the sickening sense of foreboding that clung to my soul like a noxious gas than I was to discovering how Lars was connected to all of this. I had no choice but to force what I'd learned about Cassidy to the deepest reaches of my mind. After all, Maddox had said she didn't handle embarrassment well. It didn't excuse her obvious vendetta against Amelia, but I had bigger fish to fry at the moment. One of those fish happened to be standing in the kitchen of the house I'd soon be wielding magic in. "Dad." I frowned, pausing within the doorway as I spotted his bulky figure hovering over Grandma in the kitchen. "What are you doing here?" "He's about to find himself if he doesn't stop hovering over me," Grandma grumbled, gripping a plastic bowl in her hands. She shuffled to the left a few feet, to a clear patch of countertop that wasn't littered in flour, sugar, and other various baking ingredients. Dad's movements mirrored hers, his hand stroking the length of his newly trimmed beard. Grandma began mixing the contents of the bowl furiously, her arm moving so fast I worried for Dad's safety as he hovered too close. "Your grandma is practicing her magic." Rowena's voice was as warm as her laughter as it trickled from upstairs. She appeared seconds later, sweeping down the steps in a flowing skirt that reached her ankles. When she spotted Grandma's furious baking and the way Dad shadowed her like she was handling unstable chemicals, the tender look on her face dropped. "Oh, well, I wonder how this will turn out. I suppose only time can tell," she murmured and made a beeline for the kitchen, pausing to turn and call out over her shoulder, "Lola, why don't you head upstairs and begin with Cordelia while I watch over these two? I'll call you down shortly for our lesson." "Ma, you got a piece of eggshell in there." Dad's voice was low, but I'd never mistake its depth. "Don't need nobody watching over me, been doing this for 35 years and I've never needed a babysitter," I heard Grandma mumble, followed by a light thwack and the sound of my dad grunting. I found Cordelia upstairs, rummaging through her trunk of ancient-looking spell books. The urge to tiptoe closer and sneak a glance over her shoulder was overwhelming, but I managed to keep myself still. From the scowl on Cordelia's face when she turned around, I decided my self-control was a good thing. "Are you all right, Cordelia?" I asked, unable to keep still for any longer when she swiped a hand over her face. The silvery strands of her hair were falling out of the bun she had it in, and more than once her fingers grazed the amulets around her neck. "I'll be all right, dear. You have plenty to worry about without adding this old witch to the list." A few of the shadows faded from her eyes, replaced with a comforting smile that appeared to be genuine. Without another word regarding her flustered appearance, she slammed the lid of the trunk shut and gestured to the stack of books sitting at the foot of the four-postered bed. "Today you're going to try your hand at some actual magic." "Are you sure?" I began to ask, but a loud sounded from downstairs. The light thud of feet followed, growing faster as the sense of surprise in my chest swelled. As the sound stopped, Rowena's head of auburn hair appeared in the doorway. Her cheeks were rosy and flushed with blood, but she didn't seem too out of sorts. "Everything's fine. Your grandma is just getting a hold of her magic. It's a bit more powerful than I anticipated, but not to worry. I'm going to need just a few more minutes though," she said in between light huffs of breath, and even managed a half-smile before flitting back down the hall. "I'm not sure I even want to know what happened." Cordelia shook her head softly, a hint of that troubled expression appearing within the creases on her face. She turned her attention to where I stood and slipped a book off the top of the pile she constructed. "But yes, I'm sure. Time is not a luxury you have, I'm afraid. Witches are taught the craft from the time of their birth. They have years to discover their unique type of magic and to hone it. Unfortunately, you do not. We're cutting some corners, which can be dangerous, but my life is already dangerous." I finished for her, letting a wry smile form on my face when she nodded softly. "All right, let's do this then. You think they're all right in there?" I asked Cordelia, shedding the jacket I wore as a warm breeze whipped up around us. The sun had started its journey across the sky, leaving trails of umber and scarlet that melted into gentle pastels as stars began to pop into existence. Beneath my feet the grass was cold and still damp from this morning's dew. I barely heard her reply and turned my head in the direction of the sliding glass door. Rowena had herded us outside the moment we stepped downstairs, making sure to avoid the kitchen at all costs. "They're fine, I'm sure," Cordelia replied, flitting through the book in her hand without meeting my eyes. Discomfort rose in my throat as I stared at the small kitchen window, waiting to see a flash of Grandma's face behind the glass. When I saw nothing, I had no choice but exhale and turn my focus to Cordelia. "All right, this is the sigil I want you to do," she hummed, smoothing out the rigid pages until they finally lay flat. "I'll be standing watch the entire time, so if you need help simply ask, but I would like to see you complete this on your own. It's a relatively basic sigil, so if you do miscalculate, the results shouldn't be too severe. You'll find the supplies you need in here." An unassuming cardboard box sat in her hands, small in size though I could see numerous candles, oils, and incense within. The scent of sandalwood and dragon's blood trickled in through my senses, and I took the box from her hands. "That's not comforting at all." I frowned, even though a kernel of excitement bounced around in my stomach. "No, it's not." "Is it?" she replied, but gave no further advice as she walked a few feet away and perched herself on the edge of the porch swing where the rest of the books sat. A scowl painted my face as I scanned the ridiculously small print, but was short-lived when I spotted the small sigil and its intended use. My eyebrows lifted in surprise, and I turned to the witch that watched me patiently. "This allows you to see in the dark?" I asked, even though the words sat right in front of my face. "I'm aware wolves already have a keen sense of sight, but you'll notice this is different. I've done it a few times myself and it's an incredible experience," Cordelia replied, but gave no further explanation before gesturing to the book in my hands. "All right, night vision," I murmured, "can't be too hard." The book read like a manual, only the words were twisted and held double meanings that tripled and quadrupled, tangling themselves until I wasn't entirely sure what the results might look like. I tilted my head and stared up at the moon. The tiny sliver of silver brightened the ever-darkening sky, but its presence meant I'd have to switch things up a bit. "I see you're noticing this sigil is strongest on a full moon. You will have to compensate by using more of your own energy and magic. The simplest way is to picture it, see its light and magnificence in your mind's eye. Feel it flowing and know that you and you alone are the one to direct it. Let it fill the sigil, but make sure you pay attention to how much energy you're releasing," Cordelia said, giving me an encouraging nod before falling silent. I skimmed the paragraph about drawing the sigil in oil and rummaged through the box until a small amber bottle fell into my hand. The cinnamon oil was pungent and filled the air with a spiciness that reminded me of Grandma's award-winning apple pies. With the small paintbrush I found within the box, I began to paint the sigil onto a slat of wood that made up the back porch. Sean was the artist of the family, starting young with cartoon animations until he graduated with complex figures. I was too heavy-handed, too rough to use something as delicate as charcoal or pastels. Even now the oil smeared and dribbled down the wood, but the pattern was still legible and identical to the one in Cordelia's book. There were two circles, one within the other. The final touch was adding the moon at the center, only it had to reflect the one hanging in the sky. The finished product reminded me of an eye, though the pupil was formed by the small crescent moon I'd painted. With a shaky breath, I placed my pointer finger at the center of the crescent moon and closed my eyes. The moment darkness encompassed my vision, I could feel the electrifying presence of magic building in my gut. I hadn't expected it to be so easy to picture its force. Instantly an image formed in my mind, leaving me both startled and nervous. Rather than the crackling golden light I'd imagined my magic looked like, I was surrounded by a dark and impenetrable smog. The inky smoke circled my feet, pouring from my finger in waves. A powerful warmth hid beneath my skin, and I knew without scouring the depths of my soul that this was the energy I had to work with. With each pulse of magic I fed into the sigil, the warmth would slowly fade. "Lola, I'm going to ask that you open your eyes." Cordelia's voice was soft and distant, as though she'd taken several steps backwards. I did as she asked and tried not to recoil when I saw the tendrils of my magic, almost identical to the shadows that hid deep within the forest. As my concentration was shattered, the wisps of darkness faded and scattered, and were replaced by the sound of a deafening pop. Cordelia gasped and slapped a hand to her heart as the porch light above her head exploded in a shower of sparks. At the same time, the lights glowing from within the house burst, blackening each window and plunging us all into darkness. Join our Facebook and WhatsApp group for more updates, link is given in description. Rest audiobook will be continued in next episode.